It has been a long time since I've been this disgusted with those voters who insisted that there was no difference between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. I'm always disgusted with the Trump voters. That's a mainstay. That's nothing new. But there were people on the left ostensibly, who said in practical terms, there's just no difference between Trump and Hillary. A vote for Trump, a vote for Hillary, it's all the same because whichever one of them wins doesn't really make a difference in our lives, for our children, for our grandchildren. They are both representatives of maintaining the toxic status quo of corporatism and vulture capitalism and so on and so forth. There was even a movement called Bernie or Bust, where lots of people felt this way. Trump and Hillary were both tools of the corporate political status quo, and if it's not going to be Bernie, it doesn't matter. Some of them didn't vote, some of them voted third party, some of them voted for Trump as a sort of protest vote. That idea, and I'm not going after the Bernie or Busters specifically here, but the idea that there is no practical consequence to Hillary versus Trump has blown up in our faces yet again, as Donald Trump is going to get to select another Supreme Court justice because Anthony Kennedy is going to retire and is going to now, by virtue of this, Trump will be able to influence the future of the United States for at least a generation, including possibly the repeal of Roe v. Wade. But Trump and Hillary were going to be the same. It didn't matter which of them won. I told you earlier in the week that the Supreme Court punted on a couple of key decisions, one involving an anti-gay florist in Washington state, another involving, I believe it was redistricting in Texas. And I mentioned, Anthony Kennedy is going to turn 82 very soon. The Supreme Court will sometimes forego big precedent-setting decisions when there's a justice that's close to retirement. And exactly as alluded to, Anthony Kennedy has announced he's going to step down from the court at the end of July. And everything that any sensible progressive holds dear that the court has influence on is on the table at this point. This is no longer replacing a conservative justice with another conservative justice. This is taking a moderate vote. Anthony Kennedy, a justice who voted for same-sex marriage, who has voted for access to abortions, for affirmative action. He is out, and he is going to be replaced with a vile conservative ideologue. The reason we know that is because that's what Donald Trump said. Donald Trump said before he was even elected what his philosophy would be for appointing justices to the Supreme Court. And once Trump selects one of those conservative justices from whatever list he's working off of at this point, it will be one of the most massively pro-corporate Supreme Courts in history. Could be the end of Roe v. Wade, could be the end to the federal right to abortion, and you will see many states ban abortion altogether. Jeffrey Toobin has talked about this. I don't think we're going to get to it today, but maybe tomorrow we can talk about that. And once this happens, you're talking about a return to the dark ages. And I think it is really important not to be hyperbolic. We are very careful, Pat, to not make analogies to Nazism when there is not really an analogy to be made. It's important to say, to not say this is the worst it's ever been if that's not actually true. We don't want to be hyperbolic. But what we are seeing here is a decided move backwards, away from the tenets of modern Western democracies, and Donald Trump's selection of an extreme lunatic religious right, likely religious right ideologue is going to be part of that.
Yeah, this is really bad. Instead of having 4 liberal justices and 4 conservative justices with a moderate in the middle,
Yep.
Now you're going to have a 5-4 conservative stronghold. The only thing worse, I think, is if Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Stephen Breyer were to retire, or I don't want to be morbid, but die. I think that would be the only thing that would surpass this.
Right. What will surpass how bad this is when Trump gets a third pick. Right. That's basically the silver lining is. There's more damage to be done. And the primary blame for this is actual Trump supporters. But behind them are the people who didn't think there was enough of a difference between Trump and Hillary to justify getting out to the polls in November of 2016. And unless the Senate flips in November, and unless we get Trump out in 2020, unless the next Democratic administration, whenever it happens, we don't know when that'll be, puts together a serious and concerted court packing plan, the right has co-opted the Supreme Court potentially for decades. The untold damage that Donald Trump is going to do to this country beyond his own life, right? Like now Donald Trump is setting in stone damage to the United States of America that will extend beyond his own lifetime. I hope that the Democrats in the Senate are ready to put up a fight. I don't know if they are. I wonder whether Supreme Court Justice Jeanine Pirro could be forthcoming. I honestly, I know it sounds absolutely ridiculous. I know Jeanine Pirro wasn't on the Heritage Foundation list of approved names for Trump, but I would not at this point put it past him to consider not literally Jeanine Pirro, but something as ludicrous and cartoonish.
He floated the idea of putting Judge Napolitano on the Supreme Court, and he's another Fox News guy, so it's not outside of the realm of possibility.
And if you're waiting for Democrats to grow a backbone on this, I'll remind you that they may not, and even if they did, they may not be able to do anything because Neil Gorsuch is only on the court because Republicans refused to hold hearings for Merrick Garland during President Obama's last term in office. They said, well, we're only a year from the presidential election. We want the voters to have a say before we make hugely significant, consequential decisions about the Supreme Court. And the Republicans won. And Democrats, I believe, need to play hardball. There are just a few months left until the midterm elections. Why would we have confirmation hearings for a Supreme Court justice when in a few months Democrats could take over the House and Senate and completely change the caliber and tone of American politics for the 2 years that will follow? I implore Democrats to say and do anything they can to prevent this from going forward before the midterms. Because if you replace Anthony Kennedy with a hardcore conservative, you know what happens? John Roberts becomes your swing vote. John Roberts is no moderate, and he becomes the swing vote when you replace Anthony Kennedy with an extraordinarily ideological right-wing conservative. What do Dems do? Hate to warn you, but most likely the next to retire is going to be Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Then you're talking about an even bigger conservative majority, and elections matter. Whether you're a Bernie or Buster, or a Trump and Hillary are the same, or my vote doesn't matter, so I don't vote, whatever, right? You are a part of the problem, in addition to, of course, the massive problem of 60+ million people voting for Donald Trump, which is the primary problem. You're the root of the problem if you're a Trumpist. You didn't help if you thought Trump and Hillary would have been the same. And I've been debating whether or not to talk about this, Pat. We talked about it a little bit in the studio yesterday. I've never been one of these people who says, I'll move to Canada. I'll move, partially because I know it's hard to move to Canada, but whatever. The proverbial I'll move to Canada. The authoritarian slide, the attacks on press freedom, what we are going to see as out-and-out abortion bans in many states after Trump makes this change on the Supreme Court, I've started to think about what options I have.
Yeah, and at least you have some options, right? You can go to Israel, you can go to Argentina, maybe even Poland. I don't have any of those. You're lucky in that sense.
Yeah, if anybody can help Pat with a place to go, if anybody can offer Pat a passport somewhere so that he would have an option, please write in and let me know. It's going to get really, really bad in the United States.